And joining us now in the studio to examine the issue is the former Director General for the National Office for Technology Acquisition and Promotion and former SSG Adamawa State Government and currently the SA to the President on Social Investment, Dr. Omar Binder. Good morning and welcome to the program.
Thank you very much. Good morning.
All right. I also introduce the medical director of Alliance Hospital Limited, Dr. Chris Otabo. You're welcome to the program.
Good morning, Nigerians. Thank you for having me.
All right. We also have with us in the studios this morning the senior partner KPMG and chair of KPMG Africa, Mr. Kunle Elebute. Mr. Elebute, pleasure to have you with us this morning.
Thank you very much.
And joining us via Zoom for this conversation from Lagos is the Director General of the Nigerian Institute of Medical Research, Professor Babatunde Salako. Professor Salako, delight to have you with us this morning. All right. And then we also having another guest joining us via Zoom this morning. It's becoming a regular on Good Morning Nigeria. It's President of the Pharmaceutical Society of Nigeria, Mazi Sambo Wabunwa. It's also with us via Zoom, if we can see him on the screen. And of course, we'll get to see their faces and then kick off with the conversation. I'm sure once the links are sorted out, we will have the two guests with us. Well, gentlemen, you listened to our background report by our correspondent. A couple of weeks ago, we did discuss on Good Morning Nigeria local production of vaccines. We've also, at some time in the past, also considered medicine security against the backdrop of what has happened during the COVID-19 pandemic. We have seen the escalation in vaccine nationalism and the fact that developed countries are seeking to look after their own nationals before they begin to export. And in some cases, we also saw a moratorium on exports of vaccines and other medicines at this critical time. Nigeria, some 200 million persons, we are told, in terms of our population size, and health is wealth. So there is also a saying, and the KPMG chair, you're very familiar with this, that challenges are also opportunities. We do recognize the challenges that we have in our health sector, whether it's in research, whether it's in procurement, establishment of facilities and personnel. Why is the private sector lukewarm in investing in health in Nigeria?
Thank you, sir. I don't think that's the right word about lukewarm. You know, private sector essentially will make investments based on available capital, and capital is not unlimited. Okay, capital is scarce, and the capital that's available essentially will also go to where they will get the highest return on investment. So if capital, sees that, look, I'll get a better return on investment in oil and gas, I'll get a better return on investment in telecoms, capital will go to where the return on investment is. And what also makes, a sector attractive for capital is government policy. Policy and regulation can also drive capital to a particular sector. You remember very well when we did the mobile telecoms auction, and they had to pay $25 million for a license. And everybody who bid for those licenses, the numbers were not right, because nobody knew the size of the market at that point in time. Government policy allowed them to, to be able to make those investments. Okay, maybe reduce duty, for example, tax holidays, for example, and so on and so forth. So, if you want to get the private sector to invest in the healthcare sector, you've got to have the kind of policy framework that will allow money to flow into that sector. Okay, in any case, because the other thing about the healthcare investments are they are long term. You cannot put the investment in healthcare and expect to make your money back in a year or two. If you want to build a hospital, whether it's secondary care or tertiary care, the higher the quality of the level of the hospital, the longer the lead time for return on investment. Tertiary hospitals are much more expensive to build. Therefore, you expect that the payback will take many more years, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years. And so therefore, you need capital that is patient. You need capital that the interest rate is affordable. Because if you're going to build a healthcare infrastructure and you have to pay the 20% interest rate that you charge to banks, even during construction, the interest you'll be paying during construction before you even open shop will eat into your capital. Secondly, again, the healthcare business is not the one that, as soon as you build the infrastructure, you can't go to the street and ask people to start falling ill so you can admit them. You can't. You build the infrastructure, okay, and you're patient. People have a need, they're coming to you so long you have the skills. And so healthcare infrastructure on its own is not what is going to deliver the mandate for Nigeria. Because the infrastructure can be the best in class, first class, 100 beds, 200 beds, top quality equipment. But without the skills, the clinical skills, the nursing skills that are required to be able to intervene, to provide the service to those who need the service, it's not going to work. And then once you have the skills, you got to run your numbers. Because at the end of the day, you have to recoup the investment you've made. So by the time you add the investment in all the infrastructure, the skills you require, all the various materials you need to run the facility, and you price your services, not many people can afford it at that level, essentially. Which is why in many countries around the globe, primary health care is a government responsibility, typically. Okay? Secondary care and tertiary care also are government responsibilities. But because tertiary care, teaching hospitals are built next to medical schools. Medical schools is not a for-profit business. So you can't find private sector doing large medical schools. The medical schools produce the clinical skills you require into the infrastructure. So there are too many constraints to allow the private sector to invest in the way they should in this market. And therefore, capital will flow elsewhere. So you put a business plan together for a healthcare infrastructure project. You take it to if it's even bankable, and by the time the lender asks you so many different questions, this and that and that and that, the lender is going to say, guys, this is not attractive for me to give you money. So how are you going to fund it? Right? And even when you want to fund any kind of investment, there's equity, which is money from the pocket of these promoters, and there's debt, which has been long-term. And so, give an example. India, many years ago before, now we see the outcome of medical tourism. But 30 years ago, Indian government decided that healthcare infrastructure was going to be classified as infrastructure. Okay? And they had a policy in their country that all infrastructure financing, single digits interest rate, nothing more than 9%. Okay? But the bank will say, okay, if the cost of money is higher than 9%, who gives me the difference? Government says, okay, I subsidize that interest cost, mainly for infrastructure, healthcare infrastructure, right? So that is, it makes it affordable for capital to flow to that sector. Secondly, what the government did also was many doctors in India had left the country, just like Nigeria are doing now. By working for the NHS, working overseas, they went there to go and recruit them back. Now, if a guy is any XYZ income in the UK or US, and want to bring him back to your home country, he won't come and work for less. If he comes to work for less, he can stay where he is. Why? He has to pay children's school fees, so on and so forth. Okay? So you come back into the country, and we guarantee that you get the income that you are getting where you were coming from before, net of taxes, then you can bring the skills in. And then you then have, and on top of that, of course, the Indian market alone couldn't pay for just the infrastructure. They then went and do medical tourism. So you have foreigners coming in who will pay a higher tariff than local guys. By the time you do all the numbers, boom, it works. An explosion of medical tourism in India. Okay? We can do it in Nigeria. We have lots of Nigerians in diaspora overseas. Doctors in the US, doctors in the UK, nurses and so on and so forth. You can bring them back in, but the numbers have to make sense for them to come back and for you to invest in infrastructure. If the numbers don't make sense, capital won't flow that sector.
All right. Thank you very much indeed. We'll get back to you. But for now, let's once again welcome guests via Zoom, the DG, Nigerian Institute of Medical Research, Professor Babatunde Salako. So you're welcome to the program.
Sorry, I didn't get that. Good morning.
All right, you're welcome. We can hear you very clearly. And again, the president of the Pharmaceutical Society of Nigeria, Mazi Samuel Huabonwa, we also like to welcome you to the program this morning.
Thank you very much. Good morning, gentlemen. Good morning, Nigeria.
All right. The first speaker, Dr. Bindel, the first speaker actually harped on a number of inhibitive issues, that are making it difficult or a big challenge, for the private sector to venture into a health sector as it should be. You announced the essay to the president on social investment, and I want you to give us an idea of what the policy framework, for investment is, and how it is affecting this particular sector with respect to foreign investment in the sector. He talked about capital that should be patient. He talked about technical skills that are lacking. He talked about infrastructure and what have you. So from your own point of view, what should be the right framework, to open up this sector to attract foreign investment?
Well, thank you very much. The senior executive of KPMG, I think, has set a very wonderful background on the orientation of the private sector when it comes to any investment. This is capitalistic and very profit oriented, and therefore, if it doesn't make sense, they will not put their resources in. And they normally attract their resources at also at a very high price, so they want return on investment. But health is a social service. That's why he concluded by saying only government can be able to look at this in a realistic way. But the government looks at things based on policy. So the policy has to be sharp, and health is a very, very highly biological and natural science in nature. And therefore, it needs, like he said, very, very excellent human capital base. If you don't have good understanding of the science, of the technology, of the delivery timeline, it will not work. Secondly, he mentioned infrastructure. If you don't have hospitals, it's infrastructure in Nigeria, things like it's buildings or roads. A building can be a shop. The same building can become a school the following day. The same building can become a pharmacy. But when we say hospital, it means a functional building related to the provision of health services to people. So it has to be good. Third, the knowledge, which is intangible, is a big problem for Nigeria. These intangible things, we are tangible people. If you can't see it, it's like it doesn't exist. But science and technology are intangible things. Well, you can see a professor with a very weird gown, and you don't know that he has a multi-billion-dollar asset in his head. In Nigeria, you just shove him off and say, you can't sit here. But when you see Baban Rigab's touch and big phone, iPhone, and so on, you say, Rankadede, and you give him the bigger seat. Why? Because we're tangible people. We like big cars. We like big houses, and so on. So this knowledge, we must understand too, is an asset. But where do you get it from? You get it from schools. It starts from the basic to secondary school, to universities, then to research institutions. He said it's an investment that is long-term. It is long-term. So if your schools are not good, you will not get doctors. I mean, you can't plant oranges and get cassava. It doesn't work like that. So the social investment of the federal government is not the private sector investment type. It is investment in understanding the needs of the poor and vulnerable. And we have many of them in this country. And trying to pour knowledge, resources, commitment, and so on to shock treat that. In the health sector, it's a big gap there. When a lot of people don't have sanitation facilities, of course you are going to have the effects of lack of sanitation. Typhoid, malaria, and so on will hit you. If you are not drinking clean water, of course the issues to do with healthcare and waterborne diseases and so on will hit you. If you don't have good shelter, you will not sleep well. You will wake up with headache and you are confused and you cannot be able to focus. So the chain of the effects of poverty and vulnerability on this sector is huge. And therefore, literally, we have professors here. We have many professors and scientists listening. And I see my friend Professor Martin coming here. You see him like he wants to jump out of the screen. It's not because he is like that. It's because of the frustration of the knowledge worker who has knowledge assets in them and who can see clearly how we can do this. And then somehow the policies are not tied. I was Director General of NOTA, and the only option we have, if we cannot produce the infrastructure, the human capital, is to import it from other places. And when you get foreign medicines, foreign equipment, foreign bits and pieces to build your hospital, it is at a price. No, there's no, Father Christmas has died long time ago. It will not bring anything to you. So at that price, you better recognize that you can also do it. So your schools have to be good. Your research facilities have to be good. The workers have to be motivated to do research that is relevant to you. And then you have to understand the concepts of intellectual property. How do you protect it? How do you move it to the private sector? How do you make it work for yourself? This value chain is the key for Nigeria to understand.
Dr. Omar Bindre, thank you very much. I hope it will be a lovely Christmas, by which time Father Christmas would have woken up again, so that Santa Claus is back on track. Dr. Omar Bindre, thanks a lot. As you said, you talked about knowledge. You also talked about the value chain. And that's why I want to bring you now, Professor Babatunde Salako. Professor Babatunde Salako, well, we can look at private sector investment along the value chain in the health sector. Now, taking it from the top range, which is the research institute to which you belong, we've heard on a number of occasions, you've been our guest on Good Morning Nigeria. NIPRID, which is the Institute for Pharmaceutical Research, has complained about absence of funding or just the lack of recognition of investment opportunities in research outcomes. For instance, I mean, we've heard now that there is a malaria vaccine that is ready. I will say that those with deep pockets, that is to say those who have the money, in this case usually the private sector, they didn't recognize that malaria has been a challenge for us for the ages, and therefore an investment in research to develop malaria vaccines could be helpful, which speaks to intellectual property. That's the intangible aspect. What is it that has been your experience in the research field, and what do you cry for?
Thank you very much. I believe the challenge is the fact that the business in research and health is not well known to a lot of the private sector, or just that because there are no policies on ground that support the development of innovations that private sector could take part in, just as we have in the so-called Silicon Valley in the US, where you have an area where research institutes and universities produce innovation. And then there are quite a number of private sector companies built around the place that take on the innovations and turn it into business, such that the return investment comes quite early and people can make money from research and from health. What we have in our environment is that we do not have policies that support the use of homegrown innovations. When you eventually develop them, you need to begin to look for entrepreneurs who will show interest to take this up. Of course, we have put a lot of benchmark for Nigerian on foreign standards. And therefore, the innovations that are produced at home will have to compete with this to be able to get the attention of investors. The only way will be for government policy to support such innovations, especially if they've been found to work as well as those foreign standards, to ensure that Nigerians or the Nigerian hospital or health system begins to use some of those innovations. NIPRID, for example, you said developed the Nipisand for sickle cell management. And that has been a challenge for them because they've not been able to put it into the market as much as they want it to be. There are other little small devices that have been produced, especially in the last few months from us in particular, 2 COVID test kits. And recently we just came up with 2 test kits for Lassa and yellow fever. And we are still struggling to get investors to even approach us to show interest in some of these things. So we need to have policies from government that will support the use of some of these things locally, because people will not put their money in things that they know people will not buy. And the things we have at home that has to compete with the international devices that are already doing the same work have a lot of challenge against which they need to work to be able to compete effectively with them. If we have a policy, for example, that has supported the use of devices or the use of for treatment of sickle cell in Nigerian hospitals, especially that they be found to be very useful and competes well, then you will see people coming to put their money into developing it, so that we can then develop our manufacturing, pharmaceutical manufacturing outfits that can provide a job for our people and, of course, provide cheap drugs and cheap devices for the use of our medical outfits. Thank you.
All right, Kingsley, oftentimes, when we discuss an issue of this nature, most speakers will also be happy, will always be harping on the issue of policies and policies. You recall those days that India, China, and some other Asian countries, locked down, so to speak. They closed up, any international importation of any goods and services and developed theirs. It happened. And what I get to hear is that some policies are not supporting innovations, but these innovations are there. Should government now force private individuals to engage in innovations? There are so many research results that are there that have been promoted. Just as rightly pointed out, the issue of that of sickle cell by hybrid, and many others like that. And no person has been compared or should be compared to engage in that. Is it because of our own attitude towards foreign things? Because government has a number of policies that are supporting some of these innovations. For instance, we had the Order 5, which is encouraging, ensuring that we engage in, local production and local use of our own products. Yet, the private sector is not heeding to that. So I'm just wondering, how can it be possible to ensure that those with deep pockets can engage in production, especially when we have research results that are there, yearning for mass production? All right, that's just by the way. But let's get to Mazi Ohuebun. What's happened when you are in the pharmaceutical industry, and pharmacy is a key component of the health sector. Let's share your experience with respect to the issue of having our drugs produced locally and avoid the widespread importation of drugs.
Thank you very much. Good morning again. Good morning, Nigeria. I want to congratulate NTA for the focus they are putting around healthcare in recent times. And I believe that is actually what we ought to be doing. I think that the problem with us in our country is first what I call the lack of a vision. On several thematic areas, several areas of activity or national polity, we don't have a vision that is well articulated and well sold to all stakeholders so that we can focus on accomplishing that on a measurable time scale. And without a vision, my Bible says that people perish. On healthcare, what is our vision? What do we envisage that in the next 10 years, 20 years will be looking like, on the different aspects of healthcare? If we have a vision, let's say in pharmaceutical production or local production of pharmaceuticals, and then decide the role that will be played by government, the private sector, the other stakeholders to bring its fulfillment at a given time scale, that is where to start with. Thereafter, we now say, okay, this is where we want to be. This is where we are. What do we need to do? What resources do we need? What kind of things do we need? These are the things that help us. Today, we're taking people who are going to university. They are being trained. Their training we're not planning how to absorb them when they leave school. We are having more children. We're not looking at where will they go to school or how many new schools do we need to build to accommodate the children. People are going to school. What is the opportunity for them to get to work when they finish school? These are the things, the lacuna we have. So that's one principal thing. Second is the alignment, policy incongruence, the alignment. One aspect of policy will say one thing, another policy will counter it. Take, for example, during the COVID era, there were concessions given to the pharmaceutical and healthcare industry. But when you got to the custom was interested in revenue generation, and there was lack of congruence and policy consistency. Thirdly, is that in our planning, sir, we need to understand that whatever belongs to this nation, whether it is private sector, whether it is public sector, belong to the nation. They represent the national asset. So our planning should include what are we doing when government is talking about building health centers. They should be talking about building private institutions, private pharmacies, private hospitals, private clinics. All this should be part of the planning. And that will then open us up to know what we lack in the private sector, in the public sector. Do we have adequate opportunity in the private sector? And therefore, as Elebute said in the beginning, what are the things that will make the private sector tick? Private sector responds to incentives and also the operating environment, especially in a global world where resources are scarce, and therefore they're attracted to regimes and to environments where those resources are better welcomed, better nursed, and better rewarded. So we may have policies, but if these policies do not drill down to say, and I give you an example, there was a policy about local production that by year 2005, 70% of national products for pharmaceutical consumption, especially essential medicine, should be produced locally. Today, we're still doing between 40 and 50 if we got into that level. And that's because of some of the issues which my friend raised earlier on. Funding is an issue. Policy is an issue, the tenure. And then above all, the national environment. Today, Nigeria has a low external rating in terms of a viable place for investment. Investment flows around the whole country. So my points are, the major issue is let's have a holistic national vision, plan in detail, and put the right motivation for each sector, the public sector, the private sector, and so that cohesively we can all arrive at that destination on an agreed date. When there's not this consistency and monitoring and follow-up, people just do follow what they call the least line of resistance and do what they can do, coping with all these imponderables and inconsistencies. So planning is critical, consistency is critical, leadership is critical to achieving these desired goals in healthcare provision by the private sector.
All right. Thank you very much, Mazio Wamuwa, there for your contribution. We'll return to you in the course of the conversation. Let's come back to our Abuja studios. Dr. Chris Otabo, we've kept you on pause while the other guests were making their pitches. Dr. Otabo, of course, is a consultant orthopedic surgeon and also managing director of Alliance Hospital here in Abuja. So, private sector, you also have an experience with investing in a healthcare facility that is heavily patronized. But what, in your opinion, are the major impediments to private capital investment in Nigeria's healthcare sector?
Thank you very much for having me. I've listened very keenly to all the very brilliant presentations by the other panelists. I cannot but agree with most of the things that have been said. As a player in the private sector, I have first-hand experience of the things that are plaguing the Nigerian healthcare system. And if things continue like this, we will never get investments because there are major issues. Let me start from where the professor of pharmacy stopped. He talked about competition. He talked about the government attitude. the government, the handlers of the government institutions, they see the private sector as competitors instead of collaborators. That's where the problem is. I always tell people, Harvard University is privately owned. Apple is privately owned. General Motors is privately owned. Johns Hopkins University, where they produce most of the brilliant graduates in America, privately owned. At the time, Obama put in billions of dollars to revive General Motors. Even if you are making people, individuals, to become rich, they are rich for the nations. They will still employ people. So look at the Presidential Committee on Healthcare Reform. I couldn't find any private player there. Everybody, you want to reform healthcare sector, and you are bringing the same people who are the problem to reform the system. It's not going to work. Recently, I imported some equipment from China, and it took 3 weeks for the equipment to get to the port. Then it took 5 months for it to leave the port to get to me in Abuja. Rubbish. I mean, if I got money from the bank to pay for those equipment, I'm already paying interest. Why? I've not received the goods. I imported the MRI in the hospital from China, and I asked the Chinese, my Chinese partners, to send me their engineers since it has arrived. It took 6 months for them to come. Why? The Chinese guy told me that, Dr. Tabo, we don't have a problem. We went to your embassy in Beijing, and they said they don't have paper for visa. He said, Dr. Tabo, this is the truth. They didn't have paper to give them visa. I mean, it's rubbish. So these are some of the issues. See, the office, there's an office in the presidency, the Ease of Doing Business office. It's headed by the vice president. For me, that's the most important office in this country at the moment. The most important, because if they can take out the bottlenecks, then things will be a lot easier for us to run with. No private person wants to put his money in a complex situation. People come from outside, they want to do business, they have to go through government institutions. And then the body language is what is there for me. I mean, they are not even thinking about what the people will benefit. They are thinking about what's my own. And if you are not going to discuss, that thing is not going to fly. So the issues are many. Taxation. In my hospital, there are at least 10 different taxes that come. Radio, television tax, tax for kiosk. That I have a TV in the hospital, I must be taxed for it. A signboard tax, withholding tax, tenement rate. It's choking. Hospitals are closing up because of all these things. He mentioned the issue of India. 99% of the Nigerians that go to India for healthcare, 99% of them go to private hospitals, not government hospitals. Why? I mean, the situation with Nigeria and India, they are almost the same in terms of indices. Maternal mortality is high there. Infant mortality is high. Their government hospitals are like rat houses. You have to lobby a nurse to give you a clean bed sheet. You can't stay there. But there are moments of brilliance, centers of brilliance that the Indian government have encouraged the private players to work with. They gave them facilities at very low interest rates, and they encouraged them by their policies, tax breaks and all that. And what do you have? You have the Fortis hospitals of this world, all the various private hospitals that have become reference points around the world. And so Nigerians now go there. We spend over $1 billion on medical tourism every year. And that could easily happen here. The hospital is just a tip of the iceberg in the healthcare industry. I mean, there's so much more. Okay, yes, last week I asked for 100 cartons of normal saline. That's the least thing that you can get in the hospital. If someone is in shock, emergencies, you want to set a drip and let the normal saline flow. They called me and said, sorry, Dr. Tabo, we cannot give you 100 cartons of normal saline. The maximum we can give you now is 5 cartons because it is scarce. I was embarrassed. Normal saline. Does it mean that we cannot produce normal saline in Nigeria? We can't produce basic things, fundamental things. The reason why healthcare is cheap in India and Egypt, I've been to Egypt, I've been I've sent patients to India. Our cost price is almost the same, or even cheaper. Apart from the transport cost, you will get surgeries cheaper in India than in Nigeria, and definitely so in Egypt. Why is it so? Most of the things that they use are produced locally because there are incentives. The government is interested in making the system work. Here, the implants I use for my surgeries are imported. The drugs I use for my kidney transplant patients are imported. Almost everything. I get goods from China almost every month. And these are things that can easily be produced here if government will look into it. So the issues are many, and things are not going to change. We need leadership in the healthcare sector. Leadership. That is what, in my opinion, is missing at the moment. I'll stop here.
Yes, really, these very, very crucial matters that you have raised as somebody who is directly involved in the private sector practice in the medical field. Let's bring in again Mr. Kunle Lebuta. You listened to what he said. In fact, actually, he even raised some of the points that you made in your earlier speech. Incentives, tax breaks, that we can achieve centers of brilliance as it is in India if government focuses attention on what can be done in terms of remediations now. Now, in your view, what should be done, right? Because from what Mazo Habonwa said and others did say, it does appear that there is a planlessness in this sector.
So my view is that let's shift the paradigm. We've always said that health is a social service. And so as long as you say it's a social service, the expectation is that government is the one who's going to fund it. Government is going to write a check to build infrastructure, to pay the salaries and wages, and keep up the momentum to the level where, look, I come from a medical background. Okay, my parents were doctors for many, many years. My late father ran Luth for 4 years as chief medical director, 700-bed hospital. In the 70s and the 60s and 80s, it was top 5 hospital in Africa. Okay, you had a first-class medical school next door. You had the topmost professors before they started going to Middle East, when the Naira collapsed in the early 80s.
Mid-80s.
Yeah. Far from early 80s, when the exchange rate collapsed and they all started leaving. So if government cannot fund this sector, let's change the paradigm and let's say healthcare is an economy on its own. And there's money to be made for everybody. Let's share that cake. Okay? That's what they did in India, like you heard on the table. Okay? So even if you go to an Apollo hospital in Delhi, 900 beds, the land for that development was given by government. Government gave us, but government said, in return, 20% of the beds was for indigent patients. Let poor people access that healthcare at next to nothing. So how do you run the numbers for that kind of hospital? So Apollo has to then look for clients, patients that will come in that pay insurance at the higher rates, and they go for international medical tourism at a much even higher tariff. So in the same hospital, using the same facilities, it's almost like in an aircraft. You can have people in the same ward for the same ailments, but they're paying different tariff. The poor man, supported by government, is probably paying nothing. The patient that for health insurance is paying different tariff. The patient that came from Nigeria for the same treatment, different tariff. But I run the numbers, then that hospital infrastructure pays back. Because you now decide to, like Mazi said, you bring everybody into the pot and say, healthcare is no longer a social service. It is a business. Now, the biggest off-taker, if you want to produce sickle cell drugs, should be who? Should be government of Nigeria. They have most hospitals, whether tertiary or secondary or primary healthcare. In those countries they talked about, whether Egypt or India, government buys the drugs from manufacturers. So if I'm the government and I issue a guarantee, Go and produce 5 million of this kind of drugs every month or every year. I guarantee that when you produce, I buy from you. The banker will write the check immediately. The equipment to arrive, but of course, what Dr. said about the equipment arriving, okay, you have to change the paradigm again at the port. I say healthcare is an important infrastructure for the country. Any equipment coming through, even if it's 0 duty or 5% duty, bring it in very quickly. You mustn't spend more than X amount of this at the port. Get to the destination, put up the plant, start producing. Government guarantee. So when the guy produces the drugs and supplies the government hospital, government guaranteed. If he doesn't get the cash from the government, he can't pay his bank. The bank will do what? The bank will call in the guarantee and get his money back. Because the money that the bank gave you to do the hospital doesn't belong to the hospital, to the bank. It belongs to the depositors who give depositors to the bank. So it's a complete and entire value chain. Pharmaceuticals. In most countries, generics, which are not patented, okay? Indian government supported guys to do generics. To the point that those guys become so big, they started exporting generics to Africa. Until COVID came and said, oh, we are closing shop, we're not exporting anything anymore. So healthcare is an economy on its own. And if you run the numbers, you say, what would it contribute to the GDP of the country? In terms of the people that you employ, the skills that you train, the drugs that you produce, the infrastructure you use, but how you do the analysis of the entire ecosystem of healthcare. And it's a significant part of the economy. It can even generate foreign exchange. If you can reverse the trend, where people from Africa can come and be getting healthcare here. You can export pharmaceuticals across the border. That's what India did. So as a result, it has become a significant portion of the economy. And then last point is that when you have a first-class healthcare system in your country, pharmaceuticals, primary healthcare, all the various elements of it, you have a first-class workforce that is very healthy and therefore attracted to investors. You say, let me go and put my factory in that country because there's healthcare for all the workers. And it's a important element. So if I want to come to set up a factory in Nigeria to produce cars and the healthcare is better in the next country, I'll go and put up plants in that country. Whereas the market may be here for this car. And that country doesn't have the market. But I know a project, for example, in the early 70s of a massive multinational who wanted to do a generics factory in Nigeria. The market was here. Singapore government got to hear about it. They went to the headquarters in Europe, quartered them, and the guys put the plant in Singapore. 10-year tax holiday, all kinds of incentives. And the same drugs are made in Singapore were now exported back to Nigeria. Because there's no market in Singapore now, it's a small country.
Okay, Elebute, thank you very much. Let me take this from the many points that you have raised and indeed with the other guests, that healthcare ought to be taken as an economy on its own. And I do not know when we crunch the numbers about our GDP, we refer to the contribution of the healthcare sector to our GDP. And that's why, just before I will come to Umar Bindri, but I would like Mazio Onwabowa to also speak to this. Both yourself and Mr. Kunle Elebute, you've been involved with the Nigerian Economic Summit Group. How can we now bring healthcare to the table of conversation for both the private sector and the public sector, bearing in mind all of these complexities, and not just bringing to the table, taking decisions and then moving on. I know the various things that you present for conversation and the policy issues and the gains that have been recorded since 1994 when the NSG began its intervention in our economic affairs. But when you listen to Dr. Otabo and the frustrations that the private sector encounters and the many opportunities that are there, what can be done, therefore, to put this issue, as we often say, on the center table, let everybody take a look at it?
Thank you very much. I'd like to congratulate, I don't remember his name, the healthcare investor who spoke last before Elebute, who is in the studio. I think he hit the nail. He captured it in a manner that nobody could have done better. He summarized it in such wonderful ways that I really was impressed. Sir, everything starts and ends most times with leadership. Leadership Nigeria is suffering from deficit of enlightened leadership, at all levels. That is our principal challenge. Me and you, when you talk about the economic summit, what have we done since 1993 that we came on board is to try and profile what we think are thoughts that will make Nigeria globally competitive in every facet. We live in a global world. There are few exceptions you can make for anybody these days, any country, any clime, because of the global concept, the ideas, resources, products, services flow through, and they migrate from where they are welcomed to where they're not welcome to where they are welcome. They migrate from where there is surface to where there is scarcity. This is normal economic behavior. So I think leadership must be gotten right. That's the first one, both at national, ministerial, whatever level. Number two is to see healthcare as not just hospitals. As he really pointed out, there are many things important in healthcare. Healthcare is not hospitals, it's not doctors, it's not just pharmacists. It's broad, and we must bring all that to the table, because great hospital, great physician, great health scientist, and there is no normal saline. What would they do? So everything has to come on board, and we look at them holistically. And that's why the issue of planning and sequencing becomes critical. Leaving everybody to do what they want to do when they want to do them will not help our nation. We need some more cohesive planning and bringing everybody and sequencing. You do this, this one does this, the private sector does in the public sector, the doctors are produced, the pharmacists, the medical biochemists, the lab scientists, and the nurses. Everybody must be brought on board to look at these things holistically and come with a decision. The third issue which he raised, which is very, very critical, very, very critical. Look, sir, if I were the president of Nigeria, I would be the minister of investment, not minister of petroleum, minister of investment. The whole issue we're speaking here today, especially from the private sector perspective, is investment. Investment is what creates businesses, projects, programs, institutions. Is created by investment, whether they're domestic or whether they are foreign. This investment creates projects, programs, businesses. Businesses create jobs. Jobs create wealth, and wealth deals with poverty, and our country performance will grow. So we need to focus on this. Nobody does you a favor. Investment is not a favor. It is somebody finds it mutually beneficial for him to put his money and resources in his country or in somebody else's country. There is some attraction that will bring him, and he must be sure that when that investment comes to that country, the investment is protected, the investment is rewarded better than most, and that there is free flow. He can come and go and when he wants. We need to put that climate in that form. We speak. The vice president will go to the airport. The day he arrives, the systems will work, and after he leaves, the system stops working. That day he goes to the airport, there'll be air conditioner. After he leaves, the whole place gets warm. It's a great orientation for our nation, and that is the challenge of leadership. So we need to bring everybody on board and listen to everybody and say, what this is what we want to achieve. Our researchers, what parts can you play to get to this point? Our investors, our financiers, what can you do? Everybody has to be on table. When you take planning and make it purely a public sector event, it may not just work. You need all hands. And that's what the NSG has been preaching. The summit that's held yesterday, 2 days ago, we are held in bringing everybody on board. But after that, there is need for implementation. There is also lack of implementation capacity. Government listens to us. We make recommendations. These recommendations are put up in shelves and kept, and nobody goes back to them. Next year, we'll come to the same conference. That's why people are even tired of attending some of these summits and conferences. Even though we can say, thank God, there are some measurable achievements in terms of philosophical move from a pariah nation to a nation that is aiming to be globally competitive. But the same rate of success cannot be equated to the effort we have put in organizing these conferences. So leadership, looking at healthcare as broad and bringing all actors. If those you hear about in newspapers, there are those who are in healthcare you don't hear about, but they're also as important as all of us. So bring us, healthcare is a team effort. It's not a one-man effort. You have a minister who is a medical doctor, Minister of State's medical doctor, minister, everybody. It's as if we are focusing on one profession or one group. It doesn't work. For us to get the best, let everybody get together and be given their due and respect, and they make contributions. And then we have the capacity to execute this through proper leadership that is enlightened and completely global in its perspective.
Well, many Nigerians who are watching and listening to contributions I guess are making this one will be wondering whether nothing has ever been done in this sector, because from all indications it does appear that one needs to go back to the drawing board, to redesign, and because these issues that are being raised here cannot be changed overnight. If you do a paradigm shift, as Mr. Kunle pointed out, it will take time to materialize for Nigerians to begin to feel the impact of it. But that is the essence of this conversation anyway. We're going to take a short break now. When we come back, the conversation will actually, continue. And of course, we'll be looking at the other aspects of the topic. All right, again, we are back on Good Morning Nigeria, and it's about time to bring in Dr. Binder here, who happens to be currently the SCA to the President on Social Investment. You've listened to other guests, and their contributions, will focus mainly on the issue of redesigning the health sector, to ensure that all the various dimensions of this sector are factored in and tabled, for further conversation, and of course deciding on which way to go to ensure that all the necessaries, that are required to put the sector back in course are done. So what will you be telling the government with respect to what has been said here this morning by our guests and how to move this sector forward?
Well, I think if you're like me, and I'm sure most people at home listening to this, you feel very depressed. You hear an investor in the medical system frustrated. You hear very senior people in the private sector saying things are not working. You hear professors saying things are not working. And you'll actually think that our country literally is a failure. But for people like us, we've been in the university as teachers, we came to the civil service as policymakers, we run institutions of government as chief executives, we went to work with the politicians at the state level to see. So when you put all this in a box, then you understand exactly what is happening in this country. Look, let me tell you, our country has made progress. This is the only country in the world that started a project like Abuja and achieved it. Australia started Canberra 40, 50, 60 years ago, till today is not finished. The UK started Milton Keynes. They're still having problems. We did it. And we should clap for ourselves. We might have challenges, but we're achieving things. Let me tell you, they talk about Nicosan or Niprisan and then palm oil taken out of Nigeria. I think there is some information missing. The reason why Nicosan or Niprisan failed, first, is a Nigerian knowledge asset. In fact, it started from a Babalawo level and then got normalized and then became a patentable technology. And it was covered by a US patent, the highest level. But then that patent was sitting on the shelf for a number of years. Nobody was looking at it. No private sector, nothing. It took Professor Turner Isong, an old professor, that says, hey, don't you understand the dynamics of intellectual property? You study, you produce knowledge that you think is useful, you've protected it territorially, you should move it to the private sector. That was how Professor went and brought Dr. Pandey or Professor Pandey, an Indian here who has expertise, and one thing led to the other, and it became commercialized. But I can tell you, because we don't understand the dynamics of licensing intellectual property, immediately we started seeing Nicholson and the multiplications of the dollars that will come out of it. The Nigerian factor jumped into it, and we killed it. If you want to study that, you know, the same thing with oil palm.
What was the Nigerian factor?
The Nigerian factor was that when there is money, and you see that you calculate large pool of people with sickle cell anemia in the Caribbean, large pool of sickle people in the Gulf, and then a lot in Africa. You multiply and you see billions of dollars, and it is an Indian licensee sitting in your country making it. Something tells you that if we can just squeeze this guy out, we can be able to make money out of it. And then you squeeze him out. But you don't understand that squeezing this investors into an intellectual property has a legal implication. You squeeze and it goes with the license, and then you get yourself into trouble. And that is exactly what happened. We got ourselves into trouble. The company, it was in Guagualada here. We were producing the capsules. But anyway, same thing with oil palm. Malaysians didn't come here to just carry oil palm, the simplistic way people are putting it. Like us, we traveled to other countries. We came with superior knowledge. All these people, we tried to apply it in our country. They came for a course here. We have an oil palm research institute. They saw this. They took it. In fact, the first time they took that knowledge to Malaysia, the thing flowered and couldn't produce any fruit. They came back again to find out. It's a knowledge thing. But by the time they understood it, they now started crossing and multiplying. They developed the genetics. They now can produce oil palm like this with a kernel very small so that you get the red oil. Or oil palm seed like this with a big kernel so that they get the oleochemical. They decided to maneuver it, and that was how they took over, because they invested in the R&D. They invested in the people. So in the referring to the healthcare sector does not stand by itself. The railway system operating helps the healthcare sector because you can move patients and equipment. Electricity has to also be developed. Without that, the healthcare sector cannot survive. So the whole thing is very, very important. But the thing is, I like what the professor said, is leadership. Look, policy-wise, we've tried. If I review from 1999, when Obasanjo was there, we did needs. After Obasanjo, late President Yaradua, may God be with him, we did 7-point agenda. We were all there. If you're 40 years and above, you are in Hilton or whatever listening to it and contributing to Accenture and so on and so forth. After Yaradua, his vice took transformation agenda. After his vice, this government, we did the change mantra. And now we're doing all these, 100 million people out of poverty in the next 10 years. So policy-wise, it's not that our leaders don't care. All these policies is for us to actually be able to inch forward and make progress. And we are all involved. When it comes to the knowledge system where you get it, this country has over 200 conventional universities. And in every university, like any other university, there are professors, lecture theaters, laboratories, and everything. We're producing large numbers of people. But what comforts me is that I'm not like Doctor. I don't compare Nigeria with the US. We're a developing country. And when you are a developing country, it is a code that you have institutionalized doing the wrong thing. The day you also change and you start doing the right things, you will also develop. And that's what brings to the leadership. It's all of us. So I agree with all that they're doing, but there are fundamental things. And like Erufai said, if we intellectuals, if we that know the problem, if we the practitioners decide to say politics is not our own, and we stay by the side and leave politics to people who don't discuss like this, then the problem will continue to snowball.
You know, Dr. Bindri, thank you very much. There's one aspect I would like you to also speak to, intellectual property, which is in patents or trademarks and so on and so forth. And as you have indicated, there are research outputs, not just from NIMA, that's the medical research where we have Professor Salako as Director General and part of the conversation this morning, NIPRID, FIRO, that's the Institute of Industrial Research at Oshodi in Lagos, has generated a number of products and ideas. But how do you link research institutes or the ground with the market, with the town, where you have the investors? how do you, because the investors are not just going to come to you, there's an acknowledgement by researchers that they don't have good marketing skills, which is not their fault. So how do we expose the intellectual property inherent in what they have conceptualized to say, look, mass produce this, and say to investors, look, there is a big market here, get it done.
You know, very briefly, this is a very big, you see, it's science, technology, and innovation. Science eggheads in the laboratories, in the workshops, coming up with things that are crazy that could be able to provide solutions. But that in itself is not as useful as people think. And you become professor and world-renowned for just the science. And you can absolutely be that useless if you continue maintaining this group of people. You need another group to translate this knowledge into technology. But the output of technology is not these prototypes that you continue seeing all over. These are proofs of concept. But technology is intellectual property, because now you have come up with something that is applicable. For example, a patent. A patent is only a piece of paper. It is a certificate of occupancy of that knowledge, just like your house. You don't have a certificate of occupancy, somebody enters that house, you cannot chase them out very, very easily. The same thing if you have knowledge, tangible, sitting on the table, if you don't have that piece of paper to protect it, if somebody takes it and starts using it, you cannot say, oh, this is mine. So you need a patent. When you have a patent and it is sitting on the table, it is a liability, because every year you have to service it, you have to pay some money. You now have to move into innovation, and that is where private sector is. Private sector will not touch your technology if it is not protected. Why? Because competition, fake, and whatever can just, flood the whole place.
All right, let's pause you there. Let's pause you there because time is not on our side this morning. You've spoken well about the issue of patenting and what have you. But the important thing to note here is that over the years, so many items have been patented. So many research results have been patented, yet there's this difficulty in getting the private sector involved. That's the question Kinsley was trying to put to you. There is this difficulty in moving a research result from the laboratory to the production sector. That has always been the problem. That's why when Ohabma was talking about vision, Salaka was also talking about the same thing. There's no concerted effort. There's no centralized decision-taking method to say, look, this nation must achieve this. Let's go and you will get it achieved.
That's
it is not there. It is not there.
It doesn't.
That's just the major problem. Time is on our side, so let's go to Professor Salako. Please to give us your own closing remarks. You can also touch on a number of issues that have been raised this morning on this very all-important topic.
Thank you very much. I believe that the issues that we're discussing does not lie with government alone. It also has something to do with the community. I'll be talking about the research community, the university and the institutes. I believe most of the things that have been produced in terms of results of research, innovation, patents, and co, needs to be exposed to the private sector. And there has to be maybe a particular organ of the university, like a private commercial technology transfer company that each university or research institute needs to register with government, such that the only job these people do is to work between the inventors in the universities and the private sectors. Because the university researchers are not trained as in commercial inventions to the market. So this sort of company can then work for them, look at what inventions within the university that can be transferable to private sector that can enjoy the kind of market interest that the private sector will want. This is something we have seen in some of the universities in Israel, and that is how a lot of their inventions have been transferred to the market, and it has become business. The universities also need to begin to realize the business in research, such that it's not just about publishing and getting promotion, that some of the results of research must necessarily be transferable or translatable, so to speak, so that it can get to the community and it can become very useful. Even if there are no products, there can be policy briefs that can be taken from the universities to government. If this is done quite often, we will be able to ensure the meeting of the town and gown, which is very necessary for the inventions from the university to get to the patients or the people. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Professor Salako, for your closing thoughts and recommendations. Now, let's also come back to Dr. Chris Otabo. Dr. Chris Otabo, let's have your closing thoughts. We know that it's a broad table that we have touched on today. What would you like to see going forward?
Thank you. If you look at the 2020 budget, 440 billion naira was budgeted by the federal government for health. If you add another, say 200 billion, that comes to about 600 billion for 200 million people. That translates to 3,000 naira per person for a Nigerian. That's abysmally low. We need to fill the gap. I would advise that the federal government should just focus on primary health care and create an enabling environment for tertiary health care by the private sector. There's an office in the Federal Ministry of Health headed by a director. It's the Public-Private Partnership Department. That director should be the busiest director at the moment. Because it's through private-public partnership that it can harness the private sector resources to invest in healthcare. For instance, just take roads. If government is struggling building roads, government can say, you know what, private people come and handle roads, run this place, take tolls for 20 years and get back your money. The government does not have to put money there. Nigeria is using almost over 90% of its revenue to service debt. We already know that we're in the trouble. They are prosecuting wars that are not ending. So that leaves us with very little resources to put in healthcare. So what I would advise is they should look into the private sector and create partnerships to build up the healthcare. Thank you.
Well, of course, we've had a PPP by several governments in the past, and we've not seen anything work out of PPP. That is a private public sector initiative, but they never worked. Well, I don't know whether we'll have time again, to discuss this particular topic, Kingsley, maybe next time to look at it.
We'll have to return to it. Because the key concept of the health sector as an economy of its own is one that we need to further explore.
Exactly.
So on that note, Kieran, we have to sign off our guests who've made mighty contributions to our discussion this morning. Chairman KPMG Africa, Mr. Kunle Elebute, we appreciate your insight. Dr. Chris Otabo, always a delight having you on Good Morning Nigeria. Dr. Umar Bindri, thank you very much also for your insights. Mazi Owabuwa, we appreciate you for being with us via Zoom. You can see him there on the screen. And Professor Babatunde Salako, DG, Institute of Medical Research, thanks also for contributing to our discussion. So that's it for our conversation segment. Let's go over to sports.